Okay.
Is her curriculum at all like the curriculum would be?
I don't think so, but I haven't seen neither, so I really
Yeah.
am completely uninformed.
We certainly could.
Well,
Show
Vicky has the CE.
She may, I have no knowledge of any of that stuff, because I think children belong with their mothers.
Okay, everybody, this is Chip and your name?
Megan.
Meg, Chip and Megan. Chip, they just booked the place without knowing this was a Buddhism center.
I'm
And
a little blown away when we turned that corner. I was like,
and you've been looking for
yeah,
some
I mean,
kind of.
I've been reading things for years, but I don't understand. I've never had anyone that could explain things to me.
Right, right.
This is what these things are. And I was like, man, it's so awesome. I can't believe it somehow ended up here by accident.
Well, you showed up for some of the most difficult teachings.
Yeah, well, today we're on the 9th chapter of there's a Shantideva text called the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. That's English. So all the first 8 chapters are kind of easy to get your head around. This last 9th chapter is,
This is on
like, for
nature.
example, when people write books about it, a lot of times they don't cover this chapter
Oh, really?
original text because
Yeah.
it's so.
Anyway, our
Yeah.
teacher, Geshe Nima, who's in India right now, he told me, you do the whole thing, you go through the entire emptiness. This is the emptiness chapter, the wisdom chapter. Cover it all, don't leave it out.
Right.
So, okay, so let's start with some prayers. So we'll start with this sheet first. This is and we'll just do taking refuge, generating bodhicitta. Basically, what you would do here is, imagine that there's a Buddha in front of you. And if you are interested in the Buddhist path, we're a Mahayana center, and Mahayana means great vehicle. And what's that talking about? That's talking about is as according to the Mahayana Buddhism, according to the Buddha, actually, any being with a consciousness can, through developing the causes and the condition, can become a Buddha. And so this is what this particular Buddhist center is about. And so when we're taking refuge and generating bodhicitta here, what we're doing is we're taking refuge in the safe direction that has been given to us by the Buddha, the pathway to enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. That's what bodhicitta is the wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. So that's what we're saying here. Let's go ahead and do this in English. Yeah, and we'll do 3 times. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by listening to teachings and the other paramitas, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by listening to teachings and the other paramitas, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by listening to teachings and the other paramitas, may I attain Buddhahood through the sake of all sentient beings. When it says these other paramitas, what it's referring to is a series of a process that a bodhisattva, somebody who is on the path of enlightenment, develops and perfects what they call the paramitas are perfections. And so they perfect generosity, they perfect ethical discipline, perfect patience, effort on the path, they perfect their meditative concentration, and they perfect their understanding of wisdom, which is what we're talking about today. So that's what it means when it's sort of the bodhisattva path, these paramitas. All right, let's do these 4 immeasurable thoughts. And here, what you want to think of is just imagine all sentient beings, all kinds of sentient beings, humans, animals, insects, everything that has a mind, right? Imagine them, they're just all surrounding you, and picture that they all have human bodies and human minds that can comprehend the Dharma, and then just make this wish for them, okay? May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. So one of the things we would do when we're visualizing all these beings around us is that you definitely include those who you think of as your enemies. You know, your friends, enemies, and strangers, because as on the Bodhisattva path, what we're trying to do is develop a sense of equanimity and a love for all beings. All right, now we'll skip the invocation of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and go to the back of the page, next, where it says 7-limb prayer. And here again, you would imagine that the Buddhas, other enlightened beings, Bodhisattvas, your spiritual teachers, imagine that they're in the space in front of you and you're saying this prayer to them. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merits of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until samsara ends, and turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate the merit created by myself and others to the great enlightenment. And then finally, we will do what's called a mandala offering. And here, what you want to do is imagine, just the way you would imagine it, a perfect universe where all form and all consciousness is in complete balance and harmony and working properly. And so imagine this then as sort of like this beautiful mandala that you're offering to these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and spiritual teachers who are in front of you. Imagine then that you offer this mandala to the gurus and the Buddhas in front of you as we say, Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Yeya Taya. Then, before we actually get into today's session, there's another sheet here, and these are some prayers that Geshe Nima asked us to say anytime we were going to talk about or give a teaching on emptiness. And this is the Ye Dharma Hetsu. This is stanza 5 from the 18th chapter of Nagarjuna's Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way. And Nagarjuna was a great Indian scholar and sage who took the Buddha's view of emptiness and dependence arising, the nature of reality, and he really explained it very well. And so people still refer to Nagarjuna. So this comes directly from Nagarjuna, the stanza 5, the bottom prayer. The first prayer is just a Sanskrit prayer, an ancient Sanskrit prayer. And what it's saying is that everything that arises from a cause, the Buddha has everything that arises from a Buddha, the Buddha has from the cause, the Buddha has declared their cause, what causes it, and that which is the cessation. And this is what the great Buddha has taught, and may a blessing rest on it. So in other words, it's like the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha is saying that suffering has a cause, and that suffering can be ended by if you find what the cause is and you remove the cause, and that when the suffering is ended, you can attain nirvana or Buddhahood or peace. So this is what this Sanskrit prayer is saying. Om ye dharma hetu pravava hetu tesham tatagato yavada tesham chayo niroda evam vadi mahashramanana so. And then this next one is the stanza 5 from Nagarjuna, and we'll just read this. By extinguishing actions and afflictions, there is liberation. Actions and afflictions arise from misconceptions, and misconceptions arise from elaborations. Elaborations will cease through cultivating emptiness. I won't go into detail with that. Is it Lama's motto? This one? Yeah, yeah.
Which we didn't know how to interpret.
No, and I think we almost did like a whole class on interpreting this one, so we won't do that today. All right, we are in. We've been studying the Bodhisattva way. The way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva was an 8th century Indian yogi and great scholar. And we are on the 9th chapter, which I said, the chapter on wisdom. And this is where the Buddha talks about the actual nature of reality. So in the first 3 parts of this chapter, we talked about what the Buddha calls the two truths. There's conventional truth, which is the world of appearances, that and it's not just visual appearances, it's all the senses, what appears to our ears, sight, smell, all of that is we would consider it conventional truth. And then there is ultimate truth. And the ultimate truth is that everything that is inconventional, that's part of conventional truth, its actual nature is that it does not exist independently, that it's not a self-existing thing. We are not self-existing people. We are dependent arisings. And because we depend, everything depends on causes and conditions. The Buddha says that we are actually empty of having any kind of inherent independent self-existence. And that's what emptiness refers to. So that was the 2 truths. And then we talked about dependent arising in the next session, the whole process of how things arise dependently. Things, ideas, anything you can even conceive of is a dependent arising. There is nothing that is not a dependent arising. In other words, the couch is empty of inherently existing. The air is empty of existing inherently. Everything you can think of is a dependent arising. And then in the 3rd session, we talk about the various schools of Buddhism that evolved, and they evolved into what are called the Buddhist tenets. And so there are lower schools that actually believe or believe that there is something that does exist inherently. There is something that can be found that is independent and self-existent. And then there are 2 higher schools which say, no, that's not true. So it's the process of going through these schools and studying them, which we did in the last session, is that you get to see the development of thought that leads you to this view, this ultimate view of emptiness. And it's very helpful because we all, in our own way, go through these same ways of thinking that all of these Buddhist practitioners went through when they wrote down their tenets. My scar's doing quite well.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
Molly ran around my leg.
He had a bondage accident.
Yeah.
It's doing pretty well. It's this was her.
It gave a nice rope burn.
This was her chain right here. It's not bad now.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad. I'm so sorry.
Dependent arising.
It's a dependent arising. It makes me think of Molly every time I look at it, and it's not in a bad way
Right,
because I think Molly's just adorable. So
She wants to play with
it's her little tattoo that she gave.
Exactly.
So now where were we?
Dependent arising.
Dependent arising. And so now we're on we're going into where Shantideva then is sort of setting up this discourse between himself. He represents the highest view of the tenets, which is called the Prasangika Madhyamika view. And he's sort of setting up this discourse between himself and the lower schools, where they argue with one another, using reasoning and logic. And Shantideva shows that the Prasangika reasoning and logic wins every
So
time.
it's sort of like a make-believe argument.
It's a make-believe argument
He
that
concocted this
yeah,
argument.
he's setting up a dialectic,
Yeah.
between himself,
Let's
you know.
use normal words. What's
Yeah.
a dialectic?
A dialectic is this discourse where you use logic and reasoning to, you argue with one another to get to the truth.
Mhm.
It
Thanks.
goes back to Socrates. Well, obviously earlier too,
Yeah.
Shantideva. Yeah, okay. All right, so now, I titled this particular section, Illusion versus Reality. And the interesting thing about this is, it's kind of just the opposite. What we think is reality is more like illusion, and what we think of as like an illusion is more like reality. So it can get a little confusing as it goes back and forth between the dialogue. In this particular session, we're only going to be focusing on the lower schools, who do have a view of inherent existence. They have a view that things do exist independently. So these
For some
are
reason, we're supposed to understand why they think, I mean,
well, we've
it
all
builds
thought
up
that
our-
though.
yeah, I mean, that's
I
how
mean,
we, that's our.
That's our default. We think everything exists separately and concretely out there from their own side, So,
It's really funny. So many years ago, when Geshe Georgie grabbed the chair and said, "It's the chair," I mean, it's.
well, no, actually, he grabbed that lamp that's behind you and he went, "This is a lamp." And, we think this is a lamp, and he was saying, but it's not really. I mean, it doesn't really exist. We just through our own, we conceive it to be a lamp and we label it as a lamp and it functions, but it's not from its own side as a lamp. Anyway. So these we'll start with we'll go through the various stanzas. We are on stanza 5 of the wisdom chapter.
That's great.
I think we're only on
How many are
13
there?
on money training, and we've been going at that for,
And how many
2
stanzas?
months.
How many stanzas?
I don't know, I don't even want to look. I don't even-
We're on
12.
13.
I think there's like 160 something stanzas in this chapter, and we're on stanza 5.
And
And
we're on
and part 4 of wisdom chapter, yeah. So we're being
It
thorough.
takes many lifetimes to become Buddha, by the way.
Yeah.
So.
Except the lifetime that you become a Buddha,
Except
I
that
just
one.
read that there are some practices that only takes 12 years.
Yeah, I've heard 7, but I mean, I think you actually have to have
But
the
you had to have
propensity already.
thousands of lifetimes.
Yes,
Yeah.
and
Gotcha.
no need to work.
Okay, so this is
Yeah.
the interesting way that this Shantideva has written this text. How do they call it? I forget what the word is in Indian, but it's sort of like it's sort of like in code. He's brought down to a few words in each stanza, some really important ideas and concepts that need to be unpacked. So when you read these stanzas, as I will read for you, you'll go, what is that saying? So that's what we're going through here, is we're reading the stanza and then we're going to talk about what it's
So
saying.
just listen.
So here's the stanza 5. Oh, this one's is not that hard to understand. When ordinary folk perceive phenomena, they look on them as real and not illusory. This then is the subject of debate where ordinary people and yogis differ. So ordinary people would be kind of like us. And when he's talking about yogis, he's talking about contemplative yogis who have done a lot of meditation. All right. So for the purposes of this discussion, we can broadly say there are 2 types of individuals that we're talking about here. Ordinary people who don't engage in any kind of philosophical study or thought, really. And then contemplatives, such as yogis who do. And among the contemplative yogis, there are those who engage in higher levels of meditative contemplation, as opposed to those who are sort of at lower levels. So when we're talking about this discourse that Shantideva is talking about, he's talking about a discourse between yogis of the two lower schools and the yogis of the two higher schools. And so each school, as it progresses, gets closer and closer and closer to the ultimate truth that the Buddha is talking about. And it's very helpful to sort of have a understanding, a discussion back and forth about what they think. Shantideva has talked about the different levels of understanding of yogis to point out that the Prasangika system that he espouses is the highest system. It has nothing has been able so far to disprove the Prasangika system. It's the highest level. It's part of a well, I'll go through this. There are proponents of the two Theravada schools, which are called Vaibhashika and Sautrantika, and we can label those as realists because their philosophies assert that phenomena exist inherently and independently, kind of as they appear. And they assert this, that they can exist even in the absence of a consciousness. So that's, they're saying this stuff out here is real. And it doesn't matter whether there's a consciousness observing it or not. Yeah. Of the two Mahayana schools, the Mahayana is the greater vehicle. One is called Chittamatra and the other is called Madhyamika. The Chittamatrans, they could be labeled idealists because their philosophy asserts that reality is equivalent to mind or consciousness, and that nothing exists apart from the mind. So in other words, the Chittamatrans would say everything that we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, all in our mind. So they could be referred to as idealists because they're talking about ideas. Everything
That's the word they selected in that book. So
yeah. They're talking about the mental construct of ideas. Then the Madhyamikas can be labeled as philosophical centrists, not political centrists, but philosophical centrists, in that they espouse a middle way. So it's not far to one way and far to the other way, walking right down the middle. And that refers to an insight into emptiness that transcends the extremes of nihilism or permanism or existence or non-existence. They don't talk about those two extremes of existence and non-existence. It's a middle way that you're talking about. So they're sometimes referred to as centrists, eccentrics. So here we're talking with the two lower schools. So all of this is going to be with the realists. It's going to be back and forth between the realists and Prasangika,
So between the
Realist and the idealist.
basic and the most subtle.
The Prasangikas would be centrists. But,
Centrist, yeah.
I like the word Prasangika better. It's more catchy. So well, I'm using realists and Prasangikas.
Yeah.
Realists and Prasangikas. But basically, you think the
Yeah.
realists are Vaibhashika and Sautrantika.
Mhm.
So Shantideva, the Prasangika view of emptiness is that emptiness is the mere absence of inherent existence, and the emptiness of any phenomenon, person or otherwise, is that phenomenon's utter lack of inherent existence, or you could say independent self-existence. Whether it's a mind or a coffee table or anything. That's the Prasangika view. The realists, Shantideva is arguing with the realists. They are proponents of inherently existing things, and he's arguing that when the realists perceive phenomena, they don't recognize the illusion-like character of phenomena. Instead, they assert their inherent existence, and this is where the Prasangikas disagree with the realists. So here we go to the stanza 6, and this sort of little section I've entitled How Things Appear versus How They Exist. So here's stanza 6 of Shantideva. Forms and so forth, which we all perceive, exist by general acclaim, but not by valid reasoning. They're false, just like, for instance, unclean things regarded in the common view as pure. So, what's he saying here? He's saying that forms and the other objects of our senses that we all perceive directly, sounds, tastes, and so on, are just mere appearances to the mind that are established conventionally by consensus. In other words, we all will agree that this is a placemat. We will all agree that this is a little table. We've made this decision by consensus conventionally, but I'm telling you, Molly does not call this a placemat. She
No.
calls this a toy, a
Yeah.
chew toy.
Yeah, exactly.
She doesn't even use those words.
Yeah.
But
Something
an insect would not be labeling it the way we label it. They would label it the way an insect labels it. It's
Exactly.
either a meal or it's not, or it's
Right.
a home or it's not.
Right.
So this is why they're saying that things exist. One way that things exist is through this common consensus, conventionally, really. They exist falsely because the way they appear to us doesn't correspond to the way they actually exist. For instance, something that in reality is impure, like a human body, we commonly accept it as being pure, attractive. So an unclean or impure object that's often referred to in Buddhism is the human body. So we're going to get right to sex. Sexual attraction toward the human body necessarily, and this is so true, think about these words, sexual attraction toward the human body necessarily involves viewing it as something pure and desirable. And this is enhanced by the use of apparel, scented liquids, ornamental pieces, cosmetics, how the hair is cut and arranged. All of this goes into what we think makes it look good and pure and attractive and wonderful, right? The craving, desirous mind focuses on the exterior appearance of the body that it's attracted to. It's not attracted to everybody, it's attracted to a particular body, right? Or kind of body. And it strongly associates that appearance with desirable qualities. You can desire a certain kind of person, but you're not desiring, Molly. And yet, they're all sentient beings.
Right.
When the mind is free of sensual craving, it can readily see the impurities of the body. The outer skin is a container for blood, fat, bone, thick, sticky mucus, smelly sweat, excrement, urine. Think about it. I mean, if you actually think about it, it's like what is it that Venerable Rabina Porton says, we're nothing but walking sewers. So on a daily basis, we're reminded of the impurities of the body, and we overlook this all.
Right.
You know what happens with
Yeah.
with sex, and so you're going, okay, that is really kind of impure in that area, but we don't see it that way.
Right.
We sort of look past it. So this is a very potent way of showing us how we project onto things an appearance that doesn't exactly conform with the way they really are existing. And this is only on a very surface level. In a similar way, all phenomena are completely devoid of any kind of inherent existence, although they appear to the minds of worldly beings as having some kind of inherent existence. And we will find ourselves attracted to different kinds of phenomena based on our own preferences. So we just project onto things. We think this is good or beautiful, and somebody else will go, I don't like it at all.
So it's not a universal, it's something that is coming from our own mind that we're projecting onto things. The manner in which things appear and the manner in which they exist are not in alignment. Beings whose minds are affected by the delusional grasping at inherent existence perceive and apprehend inherently existing things. This is inherently existent. This is inherently existent. This my cup of tea is inherently existent. You know, the things you really like. You know, you really, they're really inherent. They really are important. This explains why. Okay, so the manner of appearance and existence don't correspond to the way they actually exist. And so this explains why, no matter how much we crave and grasp at things, ultimately we're never satisfied by them and continually need and want something more or something different or something better. Because if this thing really was the wonderful cup of tea that I thought it was, then I would just need to drink it once and that would do it. I wouldn't have to keep having more or different kinds or like, oh, this isn't strong enough anymore. You know, and name whatever it is, clothing, your house, your car, boyfriend, girlfriend, you know, oh, they're not good enough. They're not better. I need something different. If they really existed the way that you thought they did, you wouldn't be constantly craving and grasping. So now we go on to worldly views versus the higher yogis' views. And here stanza 7 from Shantideva. But that he might instruct the worldly, our protector, Buddha, spoke of things. But these in truth lack even momentariness. Now, if you say it's wrong to claim the momentary as relative or conventional, there is no fault. For momentariness is relative for yogis, but for worldly beings, it's ultimate. Were it otherwise, the common view could fault the yogic insight into corporal impurity. So this is what I mean, like it's written in code. Like,
Yeah.
what did that just
Like,
say? I like, okay, let's. It is so good that commentaries have been written on this stuff. Because I don't know how many commentaries I have now, but I'm going through all of them. Just trying to figure out what did that say?
Right.
You know, I know the corporal means body.
Read the bare statement again.
I'll just read the last sentence because that's the kicker. For momentariness is relative for yogis, but for worldly beings ultimate. Were it otherwise, the common view could fault the yogic insight into corporal impurity.
Anyway, read the first part again, slower.
Okay, but that he might instruct the worldly, our protector spoke of things. But these, in truth, lack even momentariness. Now, if you say it's wrong to claim the momentary as relative,
Is the momentary synonymous with impermanent?
yes,
Okay, thank you.
but it's moment by moment. You know how we talked about
Yeah.
things are like some are like pieces of a film.
Yeah.
The way the Buddha talks about how things exist moment to moment it's very similar to
It's the continuum thing.
it's like how there are separate frames of a film, and when they are run together moment to moment, it appears to be as if it's moving and alive and all this kind of thing. Well, the Buddha is saying this is the way things actually are.
Exist.
That moment by moment, it's a new thing that's replacing. It's crazy that they would have thought this centuries,
Right.
centuries and centuries ago, before there even was such a thing as film, where you could sort of have an
You
analogy.
could slow it down and see each frame.
Right, and if you think about it, this is
Well, I wonder
why.
if film that technology was lost.
Oh, yeah, the space
In-
aliens films, yeah. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Why didn't I think of that? Okay, but anyway, this stanza explains the Prasangika view of how the Buddha taught that conventionally appearing things are impermanent.
Mhm.
You know, normally we look at things and we wouldn't say that's impermanent. We'd say, well, that looks pretty like solid and permanent. It's going to stay there for a while. He taught this in order to lead, that he taught that things are in a state of momentary change in order to lead people gradually to a realization that conventionally existing things lack any kind of inherent independent self-existence. I mean, this is where we get into all our trouble. We're grasping onto things, including ourself, our own ego, as if it exists independently. And this is what's causing all of the trouble. All this ego self-grasping is causing the trouble. Thus, a realization of impermanence will gradually lead to a realization of emptiness. And I remember Geshe Drakpa always saying how important it was to understand impermanence, what the Buddhist is talking about by impermanence, because if you don't understand that, you're not going to understand emptiness. You're not going to have a direct realization. The realist proponents of the lower schools argue with the Prasangikas that it is incorrect then to make the claim that things exist even conventionally, because the Buddha would say things exist conventionally, but ultimately they have this nature of being empty of any kind of inherent existence. But he will say that the appearances, they conventionally exist. But the realists are saying, well, then it's wrong to make that claim that things exist even conventionally, since they're constantly changing. But the Prasangikas respond by saying there's no fault here. To the untrained mind of worldly beings, the phenomena around us appear to be fairly fixed and change relatively slowly. Only the gross impermanent things can be observed, like when a piece of glass gets smashed and broken into bits. Then we go, oh, wow, that's impermanent. That really changed quickly. But the awareness of a yogi who contemplates how things exist conventionally is refined to such a point that the very subtle moment by moment, like the frames of the film or the pixels, or the very subtle moment by moment arising and passing of phenomena can be seen and ascertained by these highly developed yogis. And this is how the Buddha gave us this idea. This momentary subtle impermanence is an important aspect of conventional reality. In relation to ordinary people who conceive things in conventional reality to be largely permanent and unchanging, like I said, we would think of this as like sort of permanent, it's not changing. We would think that way, right? In relation to people like us who think that way, a yogi's insight into the momentary impermanence of things represents the way things actually exist within conventional reality. I mean, we don't see it, but actually, moment by moment by moment, everything is sort of replacing itself, changing itself. This is the only reason why we can move and do these things. Otherwise,
all of us, our grandson was just born. One day he will be bigger and bigger. Well, every moment he is getting bigger.
That's true. Every moment.
We've all been that size.
Right.
We've all grown and gotten bigger and older and age, and just keep changing.
Right.
We're looking in the mirror every day, so we don't notice.
I know, but if you look at an old photo,
But you look at old photos, you go, whoa. But same person, maybe?
No, but because our consciousness is changing.
Everything's changing.
Yeah, it's all changing.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. But yeah, and they go into all that. So the yogi's view into momentary impermanence it represents the way things actually exist in conventional reality. Otherwise, if the contemplative yogi's views could be repudiated simply by the general consensus of worldly beings, then the conclusion that the human body is impure would be invalidated, since ordinary people think that it's pretty nice and attractive, pure and attractive, right? Therefore, the Prasangikas state very plainly that truth is not established by majority rule. The insights of the enlightened few may invalidate the consensus of the masses. And more, that's a big one. I mean, just even think about, our just in a conventional level, our view of what's going on in the world. We all have sort of a kind of a view, and really, if you think about it, there's a certain amount of experientiality to it, our own experience, but a lot of the view we're getting is coming from various kinds of media, all different kinds of media, and those are ideas being put out by a few people, really,
Right.
but it's going out to tons and tons of people, so we're being bombarded with a view of how things are and how things exist, and it kind of solidifies, the masses into sort of a, let's get the herd going in this
Yeah,
direction,
sure.
but that's not the way things actually are. If you have a yogi's insight, it invalidates all of that. So here's the next stanza, and in this section we're talking about illusion-like beings versus illusory beings, actual illusory beings, illusions, one might say. Stanza 9. Through a Buddha who is but illusion, how does merit spring? As if the Buddha were existing truly. That's the answer. But, you ask, if beings are like illusions, how, when dying, can they take rebirth? Okay, so what are they saying? So here, the lower school realists are saying to the Prasangikas that if all phenomena have no true or inherent existence, then the Buddha too must have no true or inherent existence. That is so. Geshe Drakpa, Geshe Nima, Holiness the Dalai Lama, they've all said so, I believe them. But the realists say, if this is the case, then how can any merits be accrued from making offerings to a Buddha who's like an illusion? The Prasangikas respond that in the same way the realists receive merits which they consider to be truly existent from paying respect to a Buddha whom they consider to be truly existent, so do the Prasangikas receive merits they consider to be like an illusion from paying respect to a Buddha whom they consider to be like an illusion. The Prasangikas acknowledge the accumulation of merit and the effects of actions, but they acknowledge them as being not truly or inherently existent. So the merit doesn't exist inherently. The positive actions don't exist inherently, but they still have an effect. They have an effect. The effect doesn't exist inherently because it can be changed. So it's very finely tuned view that we're trying to sort of get here, and it's why it's very helpful to have the lower schools and the higher schools sort of going back and forth. So the realists then come back with the question: if sentient beings are like illusions, how can they take birth again after they die? When a magician conjures an illusory person, as soon as that illusion ceases, that person never comes into existence again. And this is kind of analogous to the spectacular illusory effects that we have now of what do they call them? They're called drone holograms. So they have all of these. You can see them online. They have all these drones that they'll like set up on a field, and they're different colored lights and things, and they're all organized to go like up into the air, and then they form these huge, beautiful things like butterflies or dragons or big spheres or logos at a soccer game, and it's just all up in the sky, look 3D flying around. So you'll have dragons flying through a city's skyline, or whales flying through the sky. It's just incredible to look at, and this is sort of like a magician's conjured an illusion, right? So the Prasangikas acknowledge. So, but those holographic light shows, holographic drone light shows, once the power is full, they just cease to exist.
Right.
They stop. They're not. It's gone. It doesn't have any self-existence there. And so, it's a dependent arising. The Prasangikas respond by saying, sentient beings are not the same as illusions in all respects. So we're not the same as, a hologram in all respects, or a magician's illusory person. We only compare them to illusions in order to illustrate the fact that they lack inherent existence in the same way that illusions lack inherent existence. When we see a magician's illusory person or a fantastic drone dragon hologram flying among the buildings of a city skyline, we aren't seeing a person or dragon that truly exists from its own side. We're the ones who conceive those mirages to be real in their appearance. We're the ones who do it.
Mhm.
We're the ones, similarly, sentient beings are not inherently existent from their own side, but we conceive them to be. We think they are real. We have the concept that they are. And so, and the way we conceive them to be is that we impute or attribute inherent independent self-existence onto them
Mhm.
through our conceptual mind. We impute inherent existence onto everything. And so the way everything appears to us is then independent, separated off. We don't see how things are actually connected all the time. A yogi actually could be able to see all of the energy, all the energy fields and things that were connected, they would see the subtle energy body that exists sort of superimposed on this gross physical body. They would see all of those kinds of things. We don't see that at all, because we have really we have not developed the awareness of that yet.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
So are they kind of, and forgive me, I'm probably using
No, no,
all
no,
terms, but are they kind of asking, how can this be real if nothing is real?
That's kind of what the lower
In a
schools are
novel,
saying. The
yeah.
lower schools are saying to the higher schools, if you're saying that things don't have any inherent existence, then they're
Can't
not
be
real.
right?
Right, so then how can you say that actually things exist in conventional
And then
reality at
they're
all?
saying that only what makes something real is
Right,
your mind and a universal mind as well, because you're
Things
connected to that,
exist.
like,
we have we misinterpret the way things exist. Like when we're talking about things exist moment to moment to moment to moment to moment, they're constantly changing. That is actually the way things exist. That means that the constant is constantly arising dependently. There is no one moment which you can pull off and say that this is the thing. It's just a constant progression of dependent arisings.
it's like, I've tried to explain it, I'll just be real quick. Like, if you were looking at a timeline, you pick something that happened, you're taking a snapshot in time, but
Right.
it's tied to everything in the past and everything in the future.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's the same thing, right? So you have to look at the whole thing, but what we do is we just look at the pieces and think they exist
And the reason that they understand is they have this higher perspective.
A higher
They see
perspective.
Things we can't see.
through their meditative concentration and also it involves what I was talking about before, this path of the Bodhisattva. They've perfected their patience, their ethics. I mean, they've just perfected. It's not just having the meditative concentration. You have to perfect your ethical discipline, and you have to perfect your patience and all that kind of stuff. It's all these positive qualities that sort of cool down our ego self-grasping. So that we cannot, our minds won't be so disturbed, because what happens with the ego is our minds are constantly disturbed. It's like, it's not happening the way I want it to happen. It's me, mine, whatever. And if it's, somebody is disturbing me or something that I consider mine, like my family, my wife, I remember we were once, Kavita and I were going for a walk. She needed to tie her shoe. We were at at the end of her street, there was a group of townhomes. So, and the cars were parked outside. So she put her foot up on the bumper of a truck so she could tie her shoe. And this guy comes out screaming at her, "What are you doing putting your foot on my truck? Get your foot up." I said, "Whoa." And this is me and mine, but it disturbs, our egos get so wrapped up in that we get very disturbed, and this creates all these afflictive emotions. Like this guy was angry for not really any good reason, and so as a Buddhist, if you're studying and practicing Buddhist, when something like that happens, you just would back off and say, "Well, I'm sorry." You wouldn't then engage in a fight, which
Right.
If you unpack it, well, he wasn't angry because I was gonna damage his bumper, or I was gonna soil.
it's like you touched it.
Like you-
It was
like-
his concept, it was a mental thing, his untouchable, totally his thing had been violated by
Right.
an unknown person.
Right, and so this is what ego is like.
It's an ego. It's just like all
How
saying
dare
down
you do this to me?
to this self-centered view, right?
Yeah.
Rather than this interdependent, dependently arising view of the way things actually exist. So sentient beings are not inherently existent from their own side, but we conceive them to be by imputing or attributing inherent independent self-existence onto them. In this way, only are sentient beings like illusion. Only in that way. Sentient beings aren't actually illusions. So here's stanza 10. Yeah, here's stanza 10. Where are we here? Okay. As long as the conditions are assembled, illusions likewise will persist and manifest. Why, through simply being more protracted, should sentient beings be regarded as more real? So here's the explanation of this one. As long as the various causes and conditions are present and they persist, even an illusion like a holographic dragon and a magician's illusory person will function. As long as the causes and conditions are there and the power's on and whatever's going on, you will see this holographic thing and it will function. But as soon as it doesn't persist, it's gone. In the same way, as long as sentient beings have the necessary causes and conditions for taking rebirth in cyclic existence, those beings will continue, like Austin, to take rebirth. So the appearance of both illusions and sentient beings are dependent upon particular sets of causes and conditions. So, a hologram has certain causes and conditions. Austin has certain causes and conditions. The realists respond to this by saying there's a great difference between a magician's illusory person or a hologram and actual sentient beings. The magician's person is manifested and then remains for a very short time, whereas sentient beings have been in existence since beginningless time. Therefore, the realists assert that the magician's illusion is false and unreal, but sentient beings are truly and inherently existent. The Prasangikas respond to that by saying that their difference in duration is not proof for establishing one as truly existent and the other as false. If that was a valid criterion, then a prolonged illusion or dream would be more true than a shorter dream. But this isn't the case. All illusions and dreams are equally false. In response to this, the realists present a new argument. They go, okay, here's a new one. If sentient beings are like illusions, there can be no evil in killing them. Just as there's no evil in killing an illusory person that's created by a magician or slaying a holographic dragon created through the wizardry of technology. So here's stanza 11. If one kills or harms the magical illusion of a person, there is no mind in such a thing, and therefore there's no sin. But beings do indeed have mirage-like minds. When he says mirage-like, it means that our minds themselves, our consciousness, mind and consciousness is synonymous in Buddhism. So our minds themselves are constantly, it's one moment of mind, the next moment of mind, it's a dependent arising as well. This is why one thought can lead to another thought, a new thought can come. We can put different thoughts together and create another one. The mind itself is a dependently arising phenomenon. So so beings do indeed have mirage-like minds. Sin and merit will in consequence arise. So the Prasangikas state that killing an illusion incurs no actual karma of killing because an illusion has no mind. But illusion-like beings, that is non-inherent dependently existing beings, have illusion-like minds, that is non-inherent dependently arising minds. So helping or harming them results in merit or negativity, respectively. Because
the mind, the consciousness of a person can be harmed or helped. You know, the consciousness, we all know this, we can be disturbed or we can be at peace. So if somebody is attacking us, there's going to be some kind of disturbance. It's not a good thing. It's just something that so there's some negative karma that is created, and there's an experience. The person who's doing the attacking will eventually experience the karma that results from such a negative action. Even though it is all empty of inherent existence, there still is suffering. The Buddha said that was the first truth. There is suffering. It does exist. We experience it. It has a cause, you know, and it can cease, and there's a pathway to doing that.
So could you say that like you talk about a hologram that does not have a consciousness?
That doesn't have a consciousness.
So that
You're not hurting that hologram.
Right.
Yeah, you might be really disturbing
But
the
at
people
the
who
same
made
time,
it.
Right,
Could you
right.
say that you can only evaluate it in a single moment, and if you can see it, then it is real, it is just a
Well,
real hologram.
Here's what they say. They say there is some negative karma even in that, because of your intention to cause damage or do harm to the thing creates a disturbance in your own mind, and there will be a karmic result because of that. Even though you're not hurting the LED lights or whatever they are that are flying around on the drones. You're not hurting those, but your intention to destroy and harm, and there would be some kind of anger behind that probably if you were really trying to destroy it. That does create karma for you. Not as big as if you actually killed a person.
Right.
That's pretty huge, because you're taking somebody's opportunity away from them. Their precious human rebirth, where they could really do a lot of good for themselves. You're just taking that away from them. And that will eat away, eventually will eat away at your own consciousness, and you will experience the negative karma of having done such a thing. Yeah. Which is why it's so important, even now, I mean, to always try not to harm, and try to save and protect life, whether it's an insect or a human or whatever. I mean, try not to harm intentionally, you know, because that will sort of get there in our consciousness, and we'll start creating some negative karma for us.
So let me ask a question. So the lower school, the realists.
Yeah.
Say that, you know, a mirage doesn't have consciousness or
Yeah.
and so destroying a mirage is okay. The consciousness is dependent arising in and of itself. And so the higher school says, well, because you have consciousness, you shouldn't harm, you shouldn't destroy, you shouldn't have negative thoughts or any of that stuff, because, you know, if you get that karma. So, so the difference between not having a consciousness and dependently arising consciousness, which is evolving and changing from moment to moment to moment, still means that there is some underlying consciousness that exists independent of a dependent arising of the consciousness.
They don't put it that way.
I know, I
Yeah.
put it that way.
Yeah.
I'm asking.
No, because they say you'll never find a first moment consciousness.
Consciousness. It's
You will
never
never
ending
find
from
the first
beginning.
moment. It's sort of like eternal both ways. And in that sense, it's similar to the God concept. God is eternal, you know, consciousness
So
itself.
what are you destroying then?
You're actually it's more the intention behind it.
It's
You know?
the negative intention.
It's the negative intention behind
The
it.
negative act.
Yeah. Because for instance, if say this house burned down due to an accident, you know, you could say, all right, that's my own personal karmic appearance. Who knows? Maybe in another life I burned somebody else's house down. I don't know. But you would not necessarily say that that was a negative action that anybody did. It was just an accident. However, if an arsonist set a fire on purpose to burn the house down and people were killed in that, then you would say, well, that is a negative action. That has actually harmed, even though the consciousness has no inherent independent existence, it has harmed that consciousness. There has been some suffering and pain, just to their body, their sense consciousness itself. because consciousness is not just referring to mental consciousness. There are all of our sense consciousness as well, which are separate from the sense organs, the physical organs. There are consciousnesses that go to the eyes, the ears, the nose, the sense consciousness. So, I mean, that's a really good question, and it's probably, I'm not giving it the really good answer that an enlightened being would give. Not probably, for sure, I'm not. No, but it's a really good question. And that's what's really great about this kind of discussion, is it brings up those kinds of questions. It makes us think, it really makes us think. So let's, continue. What causes a mind to exist?
There we go.
The realists then ask why, if both the magical illusion of a person and sentient beings are alike in not being inherently existent, does one come to be endowed with a mind while the other does not? Or how does one come to be endowed with a mind while the others does not? The Prasangikas respond by saying in stanza 12, there is no power in things like spells, so mirage-like minds do not occur through them. Illusions spring from various causes, thus illusions are of different kinds. So what is he saying here? Because there is nothing in a spell or in a formula,
Magic.
or in the material components of a magical display, there's nothing in those that has the power to bring a mind into existence. No illusory mind manifests in that thing. By contrast, the cause of sentient beings does have that power. A mind is something that can only arise from a source similar to itself. According to Buddhist contemplative science, the mind, which is synonymous with consciousness, as I said before, does not originate from matter or energy, and it doesn't arise from nothing. The initial moment of consciousness of a fetus, the initial moment of Austin's consciousness, does not originate from the union of the parent's egg and sperm. It has to arise from a preceding continuum of moments of its own consciousness. This continuum of mental and sense consciousness can be traced back to a previous life in which it was joined together with another body, human or non-human, that lived and died. As a result, the mind of a fetus carries innumerable sensory and mental imprints on its consciousness from previous lives. A consciousness can only arise in dependence upon a preceding moment of its own continuum. So in an illusion, there is no creation of an illusory mind. One can create illusory whales and dragons, but not illusory minds. So what they're saying here is that we have our mental, our continuum of consciousness is beginningless. And it's our continuum of consciousness. It's interesting because things are dependent arisings, but it's not like we're all one thing. It's more like we're all parts of a
Like an
bigger
ocean.
thing, like an
The
ocean.
drops of water.
And the drops of water sort of connect. But there is, you could pull a drop out and say, this is a
the
drop.
drop.
Right. So we're kind of like that. And our continuum of consciousness has existed since beginningless time. So it's that enters into the fetus at the moment of conception. In other words, Buddhism says, if there's no conception, then no mind is entered. There will not be a baby. If there is conception and there is a fetus, a consciousness is entered. So that says something about abortion.
Right.
Basically it's, the Buddhist point of view would be, well, you're actually taking away that consciousness's opportunity to have
It's getting a
yeah.
precious human
You
rebirth.
say it's the karma of that consciousness.
And of course,
Bina has
Absolutely.
detail about that. It's
Yeah.
the individuals, the the woman who's pregnant's karma, as well as the fetus's karma, as well as maybe the.
Oh,
father.
the things we don't,
Herself,
it goes on.
Yeah.
and she says that fetus had the karma to be killed early and at a very young age.
Yeah.
And I have the karma of
I
having
had the
killed.
killing karma.
One of the things that the Buddha said is that the karma is the most difficult thing to realize and understand, more difficult than emptiness.
Right,
To actually, like somebody who's enlightened, like a Buddha, can actually look at you or you, and they can see the entire karmic pattern in history and know exactly where you are. And
And what
know
you did to
exactly
get there.
what to say or do in order to help you,
yeah,
which is incredible if you think about that. I mean, that alone is a reason to become enlightened, because
and saying something to be of helpful or a benefit to you. Doesn't necessarily mean sweet nothings.
No, no.
Oh, you stupid idiot.
Oh, no.
Which then shifts something in your brain
Right.
to go then do something else. That wasn't very nice thing to say, but it was what that individual needed to hear at that time to switch
Right.
the brain to go in that direction,
Remember
which
that
is,
season.
oh, yeah, I know.
well, and, everything that appears to us. If
Yeah.
somebody says, F you,
Yeah,
that is your own
Oh.
karmic appearance.
right.
You're the recipient of that because of some karma,
Something you did.
something you did, and to me, that is a super helpful way of looking at things, because
Yeah.
when things don't go the way I like them to go, I just say, well, this is a karmic appearance. Obviously, I in the past have done something similar to this, to this.
Yeah,
And so, okay, then I'm burning off the karma, as long as I don't get angry, respond back,
in a negative way.
in a
yeah.
negative way. But just to sort of see it as a karmic appearance and go, okay.
Yeah.
It takes practice.
Especially like if you're driving somewhere and you're trying to merge on and somebody, or you're on the highway and someone's merging on or whatever, and no one's letting you in, or someone's trying to cut in, let go of the road rage and go, you know what, apparently you need to be in this spot, and you never.
They don't wanna die.
Yeah, they don't wanna die.
They're obviously in a hurry,
Something's going on.
something's going on, and you don't know what they've had
You
just
don't know
that
what it
second
is.
moment prior to them trying.
Right.
rage
Maybe
in.
they're not a jerk, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they're not doing it to me.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. I mean, I have had delays that have driven me up the wall because I'm late and I gotta get somewhere, I gotta be somewhere, and then. I'm creeping up and I see, oh, there's an accident there.
Yeah.
Had I been on time,
You-
potentially,
yeah.
You
I
could,
would have been in that accident. So I was late and delayed for a very good reason. So I'm now looking at all of those incidences.
I always think that when I'm running behind, that,
And I-
maybe I missed an accident.
Yeah, exactly. And then I gotta go, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so. We can't say, however, that a thing is real just because it's produced by something able to produce a mind. Nor can we say that a thing isn't real when this capacity of producing a mind is lacking. So in other words,
English, please, yeah, in other words.
we can't say that this table isn't real because it doesn't have a mind.
Mhm.
Or the couch isn't real because it doesn't have a mind. Who knows what sentient beings are in there?
I know.
And they all have little minds, who knows? But it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Yeah, but it exists as a dependent arising, just it doesn't have a consciousness.
Right.
All right, here's the next, what I've given these all headings. From different causes, different effects appear. Shantideva continues with the next stanza 13. A single cause for everything there never was. If ultimately beings are in nirvana, you will say, he's saying, the realists will say, but relatively circle through samsara, even Buddhahood reverts to the samsaric state. So why, you ask, pursue the Bodhisattva path? As long as there's no cutting of the causal stream, there is no halting even of illusory displays. So now we will, I'm telling you, when I read these things, I'm like, And thank you commentators,
Yeah.
people who have written these commentaries. I would not, I just wouldn't know, how to deal with this. Well, they have this lineage and
They do
Shantideva,
before.
when Shantideva first presented this orally to the monks at Nalanda, he was speaking in a kind of shorthand, they all understood. They all were studying this stuff, so it was like, I don't know, if you're talking a particular kind of language like mathematics or music,
Right.
and you're talking to people who understand mathematics or music, so you can use all these things like, oh, it's common upper neighbor tone. And it has its own lingo, and they will know what you're talking about, but somebody who has no idea, who looks at that would go, this is code.
But
Yeah.
remember this game telephone, right?
Yeah.
Well, right,
Yes, they say the same thing about the Bible.
right,
It wasn't written by the guy who everybody says did all this stuff, it was written by other people.
a lot of other people.
who have their
Observe
own
things.
biases.
Oh, yeah.
beliefs, So it's the same thing with all the Buddhists.
Yeah, you can't say that's not true, you can't say that. But what you can do is see, look at this, see if it's valid, if it lines up with, the higher
The
schools
logic.
teachings and the logic, our own logic. Once we understand the concepts of what the higher schools are talking about, then we can use our own logic at least to see if it makes sense. or
You know
not.
what, and that's.
And that's what we're supposed
That's
to
the
do.
big distinction, and with regard to the potential inaccuracies that arise from something like the example of the game telephone. You're not applying logic to the message you're getting, so
Right,
the word of mouth thing can get, you don't have an analytical model that you're analyzing what you finally hear, whether or not it's valid or not. Whereas in this particular
Yes.
study, you have this whole logical
Well,
model.
your own logic though is still.
True.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, and I
by
mean,
your own history, your own
Correct.
biases, your own.
Totally,
absolutely.
totally, totally.
I mean, a mathematician can be talking to a bunch of other mathematicians, but they're not all gonna have the same view as the mathematicians giving a lecture.
This is kind of somewhat, this could offend somebody, so I'll just
Oh, good,
disclaimer and this.
bring it on.
But an example of a religious belief that doesn't hold up to logic, in my opinion. In my opinion, is that God created his son so that he could die for all of our sins. And so, when you unpack this logically, well, one would say, living in the era that we live right now, well, so what benefit did him dying for our sins have? If I look around at the world, I don't see that it had
much impact,
it really.
a lot of cities.
And then what kind of, so logically, I think. What kind
Yeah.
of
It's
So
really
the
important
father
to
would
use logic.
do that to his son, and I mean, so.
The Buddha was not a proponent of blind faith at all. On his deathbed, the Buddha said, don't believe everything I said. You try out for yourself. You test it out for yourself. Don't believe me.
Yeah.
And those were his parting words. So that's quite different from another, I don't know, theory or philosophy that says.
I would say person who's, just so you know, I would never say that to a person who is
No, of course
practicing
not.
Christianity. And I knew that they were being helped by their practice, because I am not gonna be the one to shake their faith.
Right.
Because faith is hard to get,
Right,
even if it comes at
Well,
not thinking too deep.
From different causes arise different results, and for some, it depends on who you are and where you are. I mean, huge benefit can be gained, I assure you, from every religion that has as its basis ethics.
mhm.
Huge benefit can be gained from that, and so I would never
Right,
ever
living
criticize that.
ethical existence, being kind to one another, loving towards
Right.
one another.
Altruism.
That is the first.
Right, those are all
That is the
good
first
qualities.
practice of Buddhism. Is
But it's weird, we live with
Right.
people who think that ultimately we're going to hell.
well, that's
And it's kind of, I mean, for them, it's this sort
Well,
of
even
thing.
Buddhism has its own.
yeah. It's all levels. That's
But
true.
as you know, the Buddhists tell is not a permanent thing.
All right.
Yeah.
No,
it's-
I mean, so no one puts you there.
You put
That's right, you put yourself there, right?
It's a very different model, and so, you know, it's kind of a thing we.
Okay, let me, sorry to do this, but what about reincarnation?
What about
What
it?
about it?
Well, you know, you're talking about Christianity and Jesus died for the sins of all, and God said, "You, my son, has died for your sins," and that doesn't make sense to you. And there are other things in the Bible that you can't necessarily say are fact, because you can't necessarily say they're proven. Well, in Buddhism, you have to kind of believe in reincarnation as a part of the practice, but we have no evidence, that reincarnation actually, at least as we understand how we exist as a dependent arising, can actually be real.
Yeah. Well,
So all of these
I believe there is
different, I
evidence.
know, all of these things take some faith. Or some, I don't know if faith is the right,
Yeah.
some belief system. Because you
Yeah.
can't necessarily say that is absolutely a truth.
if you take, okay, I'm just gonna say, looking at this reincarnation question from a multifaceted view, so if you take on board the concept and the teaching that we exist as a aggregation of 5 factors, you know, form, feeling, discrimination, conditioning, and whatever, okay? So of those 5, but they're termed the 5 aggregates. This, the one that's. Your form doesn't reincarnate. Your feelings don't reincarnate, your, you know, propensities and your consciousness are the things that. Are said to.
They're imprinted, impressed
Are
upon your
said
continuum.
to, in an energetic manner, a non-physical, and thus it's non-measurable, so it becomes very difficult. How would you measure and how would you get empirical evidence?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there is no scientific
there is-
empirical evidence that you could.
According to our scientific model of the Western world that we say is scientifically measurable. We cannot, with our tools and our mechanisms, we have not figured out how to say, yeah, that's true. So then you use logic. You know, when I think it through logically, I'm not going to go into the detail, but I have enough logical conclusions that suffice to go, yeah, it makes sense to me that this thing that we call my consciousness and your consciousness and Christopher's and all of our consciousnesses have some kind of dump, you know, going from one moment to the next moment to the next moment on a trajectory that sometimes is longed onto with these other aggregates, forms, for example, would be, you know, and so I think one of the levels that's for me helpful to do is remember that what we think of as a person is 5 aggregates. When you start to dissect the aggregates and how they work together, then it introduces a new way of looking at the question of reincarnation, or it, you know, adds a prism to look at the question of reincarnation that's helpful for me, because I mean, Venerable Robina has said this, you know, and I know you find her to be very cutting to the chase, and you know, she said, you know, without reincarnation, practicing Buddhism makes no sense. I mean, there are other traditions where you can practice love and compassion, and but in terms of the overall framework of the practice, that's her, you know, she said that, and I assume. Yeah, she doesn't say anything that one of her teachers hasn't said. But anyways, it's yeah, I mean, you know, I just think of it logically. I don't need any of the woo-woo weirdo examples that prove reincarnation is true. I just think it through logically and go, well, yeah.
Well, I know if you negate everything else, you end up saying this is the only way it can be, otherwise it can't be.
Something like
Yeah,
that.
no, I know, I'm just saying that.
Yeah, we don't have the tools to measure it. at
Right,
this point.
in some sense,
Yeah.
but you know, when you get in these debates between the different philosophies of religion and who believes in what. An example, I think Tom and I had this debate.
I'm sure.
Contractors.
But we, no.
He's a great guy.
You know, the Bible says, like,
That's fair.
I grew up Christian, I gotta say, like, maybe words within words, man. Jesus said you have to be born again, maybe meant actually being born. Again.
I don't know.
Maybe
Right.
it's Chat GPT,
Oh,
you know, these questions.
Oh,
And the same thing again, it's the same thing I get from Tom, saying, well, this is what the Bible says, and this is what everybody says, well, you know. Hearsay is hearsay, you know, tell me that there, well, of course, we never knew if Jesus really existed, because, you know, I mean, nobody.
We can actually say that about our entire history. Because it's, you know, we only get the history
from the-
from the ones who won the war. So we don't, that's the thing, maybe sometime it will be revealed in some way that we don't understand, but until that time, I think you have to, I remember asking Geshe Drakpa about this whole belief, how can I even believe a Buddha exists? And he said to me, this was early on, and he said to me, well, just test out, you know, the Buddhist teachings, try them out for yourself, see what you think. If they make sense to you, then you will develop a little faith that there maybe the Buddha knew what he was talking about. And so the more you do it and the more it makes sense to you, the more faith you actually have that what the Buddha was saying is making sense.
Right.
And he wasn't, you know, trying to fool me or anything like that.
You know, something else that happens, I think, is some of these experiences yogis have start to leak through occasionally. And it's just enough, I feel like it's just enough for, and this is my own experience, for me to go, oh wow, so there must be something to this practice. You know, something like what Christopher was talking about, yogis, when they can see the frames of the film, you know, they see the.
They see each moment, yeah.
You know, you'll have a moment where just in a flash, and you'll perceive things that way, and you'll go, oh wow. And it comes and goes, but there's just like these little intimations, like, I mean,
wonder what it would be like giving LSD or magic mushrooms to a yogi.
yeah.
I
I've
don't
read
think
this,
they
I
do.
don't know that it's true, but I've read that they don't, nothing happens.
Cause they're
Well,
all,
it's
they're
I
all
don't know that it's
there.
true.
Because, you know, the mind, when you give it these mind altering substances, can do some pretty uncommon things.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay, here's a possibility. So you're looking at it from a material, I'm guessing that you're. Something about the way you said that suggests that you're looking at it from a mechanical point of view. You take the drug, it does something to your brain. What if you take the drug, it affects your winds, the knots at your chakras loosen, the energy enters your central channel, and you begin to use a part of your consciousness that you don't normally have access
It's always
to.
there.
That's,
Right.
that's.
I mean,
It's been there all along.
so it's,
Yeah.
I mean,
So we have to just say these things are possible because we actually don't know. We have not had our own direct experience of,
I mean, it's, you know, the latter makes more sense to me than the drug. I mean, my mind is, this is coming from, you know, we dealt with Patricia,
Yeah.
this is coming from somewhere.
yeah, I mean,
The giraffes and the trees.
right. And I mean, the Buddha said the mind is not the brain. The mind is consciousness. Okay,
I think it's time. for
We're
us
gonna have to wrap
a
this up.
Extended retreat where we kind of go into a sensory deprivation chamber and see what we come up with.
remember the guy who used to come here? He used to run those sensory deprivation. Moises, yeah.
Moises, if you're out there.
Well, I think he got out of the sensory deprivation chamber business. I don't think there's enough money in it. Yeah.
People who say,
Tanning salon probably would be a better choice. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna have to stop there.
Cover car wash on the side of it.
Let's see, we'll do a dedication. So,
Okay, so next Saturday evening, if you're free, it'll be sort of a question and answer with the Geshe and a lot of lights up.
Yeah, actually-
If you're free and you wanna meet, we'll be sending out a letter. If you're called and drawn to.
Any questions that have come up from this, we could ask.
Who's who we asking?
Geshe, something neat.
He
Tokni?
happens to be in town.
Oh, okay, all right.
He's just from the same monastery as Geshe Zopa.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
Yeah, Sarah,
Yeah, okay.
Yes, Sarah.
he probably knows or knew Geshe Sopa.
Yeah, I mean, I rattled off some names of our teachers and the dude was saying, oh yeah, he knows some of those.
Yeah, and the guy, Sean, who he lived at Sarah for how many years? And he speaks, so he can do a little translating.
His name is Geshe Nawang Sokni. Sokni.
Sokni.
I will send it out. Geshe
Now
Nawang.
in Sochi.
He's gonna be here Saturday.
Yeah, Saturday night, that's when
Yeah,
we
he
do.
can't come on Sundays, but he can come on Saturdays.
So that may be our class for next weekend,
Okay.
All right.
or we could do one on Sunday too.
Yeah, this is more of a.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and do one on Sunday too. Whoa, 2 events. My God. Okay, so we're the dedication prayers. Let's say these in English. They're on the second to the last page on the back of the page. Yeah. Yeah. So starting where it says Jiangqi, okay, or we'll do this in English. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. May the view of emptiness not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. And then go to the last page. And say the final dedication, and we'll do this in English as well. In all my lives, may I not be separated from true lamas, and so enjoy the splendor of the Dharma, fully perfecting the virtues of levels and paths. May I speedily attain the state of Vajradhara. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Hey, good seeing all of you guys on Zoom.
Thank you, Christopher.
Hi, Ann, I know you're there.
Thank you, everybody.
Lee,
Yes,
where are you still in Texas?
I am for a week. I'm going to France next week for 2.5 weeks, and then we go to Oregon.
All right, well, when you're,
What?
I'm gonna stop the recording, okay?